Welcome to the last talk of Martin Center Research Seminar Series of the Land Term 2021. This seminar is hosted and supported by the Martin Center for Architecture and Urban Studies at the University of Cambridge. The theme for the 51st annual series this year is architecture and energy. Today, we have invited Professor Stevenson from University of Sheffield. Welcome, Finn. Thanks for coming today. I'm Louise, one of the conveners of this year's seminar series. Before the talk, let me go over a few housekeeping for the seminar today. Today's seminar is going to be recorded. We will upload the recording to our YouTube channel later. This talk will be around 30 minutes. It is live streaming on Facebook until we open the channel for questions. There are several options to join the Q&A section, either by clicking the raising hands button on the bottom of the screen or typing your question in the Q&A box. Once our convener have invited you to the panel, please do not forget to unmute yourself. Now, I would like to hand over the mic to my colleague, Nacha. Nacha.
Hi, thank you very much, Louise. I'd like to introduce our very special guest today, Professor Dean Hawkes, who is an expert in the field of environmental design in architecture. So when we first got in touch with our speaker, Fionn, she told us that she had been a student in architecture at Cambridge from 1978 to 1981, and that the main influence of her research stemmed from that time, working with Dean Hawkes on housing standards undergraduate dissertation. And so I would like to now hand over to Dean to say a few words. So over to you, Dean.
Nadja, thank you very much. I'm delighted to be asked to introduce Fionn to you today. As has already been said, she's Professor of Sustainable Design at the School of Architecture at Sheffield University. I think the greatest privilege in being a university teacher comes from the students one meets. And it's already been said, Fionn and I met when she came to the Cambridge School in 1978. And then we worked together on her third year dissertation in 1981. And that was on housing. And it was a reflection of the deep social and I think political commitment that she held then. And I think I dare suggest holds to this day. I hope so. She smiles. Now, in the intervening 4 decades, I find it shocking. It's 4 decades since that dissertation was delivered. She's followed a rich and varied career in both practice and the academic world. I think the element of practice that she's engaged in is very important in the development of all of her work. And she completed her architectural education at Sheffield. I have to say, to my dismay, I really wanted her to and hoped she'd stay in Cambridge. But I think I think I remember her saying to me that there's another world out there beyond Cambridge, and it's a really important world. So I think that was absolutely the right thing to do. And then later she received her PhD from the University of Dundee. Her research is concerned with the development of innovative methods of building performance evaluation, and with a particular emphasis on the interaction between buildings and people. What are buildings about if they're not about people? And that's the subject of her book, published in 2018, Housing Fit for Purpose, Performance, Feedback and Learning, that she's very kindly suggested had its roots in that student dissertation 40 years ago. So the title of her talk is derived from the title of the book, Housing, Performance, Feedback and Learning. So Fionn, welcome.
Thank you very much, Dean, and it is a real pleasure to be here. I'm going to go straight into the presentation and just share my slides with you, but I'm really honoured to be with all of you, and it's lovely to come back to Cambridge. So yeah, I'm just going to spend about half an hour presenting, and that will hopefully give us lots of time to have a rich discussion about this area. So as Dean said, I was in practice for 8 years, and I've been doing academic and research for the last almost 30 years now. And after designing and discovering that my own designs weren't fit for purpose sometimes, that kind of drew me into housing design in terms of policy and also performance. And so I've been involved in a wide range of research projects and also a number of boards advising the government on housing performance. And I guess I spotted a gap, both a research gap and also a practice gap, which was that there hadn't been a book written on housing performance, housing post-occupancy, and there really needed to be one. And that's what prompted me to write the book. So a quick bit of context before we dive into the detail. My work, I am passionately political about housing as well as fascinated by researching it. And the challenge today has never been more urgent. We have the terrible climate emergency that we're in, and we need 29 million homes across the UK, 29 million to be made low carbon, well, actually zero carbon, hopefully. And at the same time, we're still relentlessly building new homes, lots of them. So, these are massive challenges. And I'm just putting up an image here from Terry Farrell. No offense to Terry, but this is a very typical slide of the kind of way in which architects think about buildings, whether it's online or offline. And it's our dreams, really, our dreams of what we want to design, our design intentions. And those dreams are also translated via energy modeling. And energy is the main focus of the talk today. So here's the energy dream, complete with the PV panels and the biomass and lots of insulation to reduce the energy demand, all sorts of good things. But of course, that's not the reality. And here we see some of the things that are implicated in energy use, so particularly heating and ventilation. And here we see desperate measures on the left-hand side where the hapless inhabitant has propped open a chair to create decent ventilation, cross ventilation. And the top right-hand picture is even more worrying and a very common sight in the UK, which is a filter for a ventilation system. And unfortunately, in this case, the filter was unknown to the client, the housing association, and also entirely unknown to the inhabitant, which is why it's absolutely clogged up. And the energy implication for that is that the system is not running efficiently. And then, of course, there's all the health implications. And then there's the workmanship issues with our buildings. The bottom right are still very major. A key failing in our housing industry is that housing often isn't fit for purpose in terms of how it's constructed, how it's built. And that can be down to very simple things like how we insulate hot pipes to prevent a waste of energy through heat loss through hot pipes. And even though they may be insulated, they're often not insulated at the junctions properly. And all these multiple factors combine to lead to a fairly drastic situation. Now, we've also got another energy implicated situation, which is the temperature rise on average across the world. And we had 4.5 million homes overheating just 3 years ago in the UK. And energy is also implicated in health issues. Fuel poverty is a major factor in housing. And often people try and save money, save energy, and reduce their heating. And that often has very dire implications in terms of potential mold issues, and mold spores cause asthma. So we know our homes are underperforming, and translating that into an energy problem, we know from lots of research that's been done that homes in the UK very typically use twice as much energy as they're predicted to use. And the big debate is whether that is down to the building or down to the people or down to a combination of both. And my aim is to make sure that everybody agrees it's down to both. So why is this happening? This is a wonderful cartoon from Hellman from the AJ. And the reason this is happening is that we are flying blind. There are no legal requirements to provide feedback. And we often, as designers, we operate in what I would call a black box environment, where we create designs without really knowing where the designs are coming from in terms of how previous designs have performed, and indeed without really knowing where designs are going to in terms of going on to measure how those designs have actually performed. And probably the biggest tragedy is that we don't even teach our students how to learn from building performance that's happening in reality. We teach our students about how to look at case studies. We teach our students environmental principles. But what we don't do is take them to buildings and demand that they actually carry out an environmental performance review of that building. That happens in very, very few schools of architecture. So why should we be doing all this? It's blindingly obvious that, you know, if you carry out a performance evaluation of a building, you can improve both the building and the design process that was behind it. And you can improve both the product and process, the risks, the defects, the maintenance. You can also begin to future-proof it by understanding what's going on with the building for real. This makes happy people, and the happy people make happy customers. What does all this mean for energy? Exactly the same, which is that in improving the process and the product, we can also help to reduce the energy demand, and we can help to eliminate unforeseen defects and unforeseen maintenance issues that increase energy demand. So what I'm trying to do today is to steer us away from seeing energy as a single subject. Energy is implicated in the home everywhere and always. And that means really that we have to move beyond thinking just about energy to asking very, very broad questions. And these are 4 perennial questions that have been asked for decades now in post-occupancy evaluation. Beyond understanding the energy demand, we need to know whether people's needs are being met. And we need to understand the problems that are happening now, but also how we can prevent future problems. And you know, the real key contribution of doing post-occupancy evaluation, of looking at building performance for real, is that it helps us to validate the modeling that we're researching and producing, and it helps us to evaluate the simulation tools that we use. You know, without having that validation, these tools remain very, very blunt instruments. So the basic approach that I would argue for is a multi-method, mixed methods research approach to thinking about building performance. And when we want to compare design intentions to reality, this means a mixed methods approach of both hard and soft data. And very often POE tends to fall on one side or the other. So we tend to get physical scientists doing the hard data, which is looking at the physical comfort, pollution, fabric performance, energy use, and water use. And then on the other side, we have the social scientists who are looking at perceived human needs and people's capabilities in terms of them using their homes, looking at their perceived comfort, their cognitive understanding of how they control the home, how they're able to learn to use the home, and how satisfied they are. And you would think it would be obvious that these two should work hand in hand, but we have a real disciplinary chasm still, where it is very, very hard to find evaluation teams that actually synergize the hard data with the soft data through triangulation. So we tend to still see these data sets reported separately and not combined in terms of being analyzed together. For example, to show how the soft data implicates the hard data and how the hard data implicates the soft data. And that's because we're probably missing another discipline, and that is someone who is able to, a T-shaped professional who is able to relate to both hard and soft data. But you know, the UK education system and even the university system is still pretty much hardwired into disciplinary silos, and it's still very, very difficult to do transdisciplinary work that combines this data, still in the energy field also. So another big point I'd like to get across today is that when we're thinking about using the mixed methods, we really should start lightly, and we should only dig into monitoring and deeper forensics around building performance if it's really needed. And this was a lesson I learned from Adrian Lehman and Bill Bordas, who introduced me to post-occupancy evaluation by saying, look, Fionn, for God's sake, don't go out and cover a building in kit and monitor it to death. That's really not the point. The point is not to monitor what's happening every day as a routine. All that does is tell you every day what's happening. And if it's the same every day, then it's the same and the same. The point is to design your research in such a way that it throws up the exceptions. And you know, it's a big challenge for us as researchers. We have limited amounts of money. Kit is very expensive. And one of our challenges is how to be nimble and effective with small amounts of money that can have, you know, to design research that can have great impact. And so my argument today is that very often a light touch POE can have significant impact, even though very often we're encouraged to go for the forensic level of POE. So I want to introduce you to the 6 actions that I outline in my book, which are the very lightest touch of POE that I think is sensible. And basically, they're set out in a specific order, that you should carry these methods out in this particular order, because each method builds on the previous method and they all inform each other. And so the first method is the audit, to actually understand what you have in front of you in terms of the original design intentions. And that means looking at the drawings and documentation. Once you've scrutinized those and looked for any changes that may have happened whilst the building was being built, you're then in a position to look more intelligently at any energy or water use audit that you undertake. And once you've done that, and you understand a bit about what the energy use is and what the drawings are, you're then in a position to do some thermographic work to actually look at how the fabric is performing. And it's really important to do this not just on the outside, but very much on the inside as well, because very often it's the furniture arrangements that can have a significant impact. And once you've understood the kind of physics of the situation, you're then in a position to engage with the social side. And this is why it's so important to carry out the survey of the inhabitants after you've understood the initial physics. Because when you get the results back from the survey, you can triangulate them against what you already know about the building. And that makes the analysis of any social questionnaire much, much more powerful. And then once you've done all of this, you're then in a position, armed with the information from these 4 methods, to make a visit. And that's the point when you engage with the building in anger, in real terms, and you can go with your design team and also meet an inhabitant and actually have a short tour and be able to discuss the findings from the 4 methods, and also obtain any further insights from the design team, contractor and inhabitant. And whilst you're there, you can do some very simple spot checks. And these are the kind of spot checks that really everybody should be doing nowadays as a matter of course. So thermography is now relatively cheap and effective. I would say it's probably not simple in terms of it does need expertise to carry it out, but the results, as you can see in this image, are indeed very simple. It's very quick to see from the red in the camera where the insulation is simply missing. So this is our building stethoscope, and as architects, we should treat our buildings as patients, and we should always check their pulse, but we should also check whether they're still breathing, and we should check whether the skin is intact. And the thermography can really act as a good stethoscope in that regard to take the feeling of the building. And the great news is we can do this now with technology that can clip onto our phones. And this is the kind of kit we give our students now. Very simple POE kit, which can just quickly do a very rough check of light, temperature, relative humidity, and decibels. Not particularly accurate, but can often be a very quick validation of what an occupant is saying. If an occupant is saying, I feel really hot in here, and the temperature is actually only 21, then you know that you're probably dealing with a building that is performing okay, but an occupant that is particularly sensitive. And it's these cross checks that are so important. So I'm going to just take you through a really quick case study to show you how this works in practice. So this was a retrofit of a 1960s block by a very well-known housing developer. And we started off with the light touch approach, and we ended up having to be quite diagnostic. And the three key issues that came out here, which were quite disturbing, were severe overheating, the fact that there was a single aspect plan, which I think is awful, actually. I think we should ban single aspect plans. The Victorians introduced them as a means of compressing housing, and we're seeing them come back today. And I think Dean introduced me as someone political, and I am political. I do think that the current government encouragement of single aspect as a means of increasing density is awful, because it gets rid of cross ventilation and relies on mechanical ventilation. It's non-passive. So there's very poor ventilation in this design as well. So this is what we found, and we identified this initially from the light touch and the inhabitants, who let us know in no uncertain terms that they were too hot, and that they couldn't open the windows more than 100 millimeters. When we looked around, we could see there were no trickle vents, and it very quickly became evident to us that the only route of ventilation was from the front door to the kitchen, and it completely bypassed the living area and the bedroom areas, which is actually probably where it's most needed. So we had a ventilation bypass happening here, and this was pretty awful in terms of the carbon dioxide levels that we were getting in the bedrooms, which were really quite high. Readings of 2,000, 2,500, really pretty high. And so we had to dig in a bit more, and we got forensic, and we did some flow testing, and we discovered that the mechanical ventilation was poorly installed, poorly commissioned, lots of problems. And how does all this impact on energy? Well, this was the energy results we got when we did the energy audit. So this was just a sample of 20 homes. And you can see here there's a massive variation in energy use. And the argument out there is that, if we fix the fabric, then we need to educate the occupants. And this always drives me round the bend, because in my experience of having done more than 100 of these kinds of projects and looking at buildings after they've been occupied, actually very often it's the residents or the inhabitants that are at the end of the problems, and they're not causing the problems. The problems are happening to them. And it's very often either design faults where they can't use the equipment because it's poorly designed or poorly illustrated, or it might be construction faults where they simply can't access something because the contractor's changed a detail, or it might be another design fault where, again, they can't access equipment properly or maintain it properly. And, very often people, if they are behaving in certain ways, it's because they've been instructed to do so. So, for example, with mechanical ventilation, they are instructed to keep the windows closed all the time, or they are instructed to leave the mechanical ventilation on all the time. So people are conditioned by the building, and I think that's an interesting way of thinking about buildings. It was quite an old-fashioned research idea, this notion of architectural determinism, but I think that's very much back in fashion again now, and we do realize that people, in terms of how they use energy, it's very much determined by the type of building they're living in. And I guess what's interesting with this slide is just looking there, there's one person there working from home, and that's 400 kilowatt hours per year. That's the highest one. So obviously people's lifestyles does affect the energy. There's no doubt about that. And the point is that we need to be able to disaggregate our understanding of people's lifestyles and where the design faults are. So we did some thermography, and that threw up some very interesting physics. We discovered a stack effect in the core of the block, and that of course meant that people at the top were benefiting from greater heat in the summer, which was too hot for them, but also greater heat in the winter, which was nice, made it cheaper. The user survey tended to show that everything was okay. But actually, when we dug in, we discovered that there was a massive issue with overheating in the summer and cooling in the winter. And this is a very common effect called the forgiveness factor, where people often, if you ask someone how they are, and if you say, are you fine? How are you? And they say, oh, I'm fine. That's a very big, broad question. But then if you ask people a more specific question, like, how's your back today? They'll say, oh, it's a little bit painful, but it'll be fine. So we do know that when we ask specific questions about buildings, we tend to get more accurate answers. And so when we were doing the surveying and the monitoring, we were getting temperatures of 35 degrees in the bedrooms, which was really shocking. You know, when the temperature outside was a good 7 degrees lower. So that was really quite problematic. And when we looked into this more deeply, we realized there were a number of different issues, and we were only able to establish the cause of the problems by using this mixed methods approach. You know, we could not have arrived at the conclusions we got to without using all the methods. And, you know, it came back to albedo effects. It came back to the fact that there was this massive tarmac car park, black surface that was reflecting heat on the west side of the building. And, you know, bear in mind, again, we've got these single aspect flats. So every room faces west. So the sun is pouring in the afternoon in the west, doubled up by the car park heat, doubled up by the fact that there were huge windows that couldn't be opened or opened very, very little, with absolutely no shading. So no wonder it was overheating. And these problems continue. That was a retrofit, but these problems continue to haunt us also in new build, even in passive house homes, which are meant to be state of the art. You know, we are still seeing problems with the usability of the technology. And from a theoretical point of view, I mean, I think what's important here is to factor in the theoretical approaches that we use. And with a mixed methods approach, I think it's really important to combine the social science understanding with the physics. And that actually means dragging those team of researchers into a room together and getting them to talk to each other until they understand each other. Because if you produce separate reports for the social science side and the physics side, then you miss out on a lot of the synergistic results that you can get from this kind of work. I use practice theory from social science. That's Shatskian theory, which tends to not think of the users as a subject, but to look as inhabitants and users as being implicated with the building. So the building and the users are considered together as a single network, a single entity. And, you know, the building is an actor that affects the person is an actor that affects the building can learn from the person can learn from the building. So it's a very, very deeply intertwined relationship. And it's very much about the meaning that a building has for the inhabitant. If the building is meaningless, then it's a good chance that the inhabitant won't know how to use it or won't want to use it particularly well. In this slide, we've got some solar panel controls up in the attic. So that was pretty meaningless to the inhabitant because they didn't even know they were there. The other great way we can use building performance is to pre-validate retrofit. So this was a project done by Professor Rajat Gupta, where he actually interviewed the occupants before the retrofit and audited the energy before the retrofit to give himself firm benchmarks before actually doing anything about the retrofit, and that worked really well. So I'm going to rush on quickly now because there's relatively little time. So basically I'm saying that POE can improve design, and very importantly, it can empower inhabitants through co-design. So particularly in social housing, where we know the residents that are going to move in, whether they're co-housing or cooperatives or housing associations, we can actually engage with those residents even before we start the post-occupancy evaluation, and they can be part of designing the methodology for the post-occupancy evaluation. And that's something that's rarely done, and I'd love to see more of. Because if inhabitants are brought into the POE process from the very beginning, they are exceptionally responsive and engaged when it actually happens. So this is the feedback process. If you engage in feedback and bring it back to the brief, you get a virtuous circle, or what I call an organizational smile. There's good guidance on these methods out there now. Apart from my book, there's also guidance now being produced online. The book, in true Cambridge style, is not simply capturing today. As always with Cambridge, we think of our history. And so the early part of the book does take a retrospective historical look at the history of post-occupancy to see where it came from. And that's really so that we don't reinvent the wheel. But it does also look to the future, and it looks to future challenges, particularly around future proofing and thinking about energy in terms of the resilience that we now need for housing. So both of these guides take slightly different approaches. I take a very basic approach. The second guide is more in depth, but I would still argue strongly that if we can simply encourage people to start with the 6 basic methods, to dip a toe in, we may have a chance of turning around the massive tanker that is currently our housing performance problem. So I'm also working as a campaigns director for this organization, which recently carried out a state-of-the-art review of performance evaluation of new homes. So that's also worth a look at. And we're very interested to work with Cambridge University, with all the universities, in terms of developing a strong network, a strong community of practice around building performance. So just to conclude, why haven't we been doing this? POE has been out there for decades, and it just always fascinates me. We have all the technology and guidance we need. We have good housing models, but the trouble is we just don't do it. And we've only got 10 years to get the housing performance right. So really, I guess I'm just encouraging everyone to do it. And for you as researchers, if you know people who are involved in building design, if you yourself are involved in building design, or if you're involved in any building projects, please, please, please tell everybody to go out there and carry out an evaluation in reality. Yeah, so I hope that's been a quick gallop through the kind of work that I do. I haven't been particularly theoretical, but I'm very happy to move on to the deeper theories behind the work that I do, in terms of linking physical performance with social performance. So thank you very much.